The judge looked at me, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. Then he looked at the tear-streaked face of my son, Derek. The silence in the courtroom was a heavy blanket. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "your son's counsel has painted a very specific picture of you. Is it true you have evidence to the contrary? Specifically, a recording?" I gave a single, slow nod. My hand tightened on the small digital recorder in my toe pocket. This was it. The moment the entire rotten dam would finally break. It's funny what people think about old men. They see the gray hair and the wrinkled hands and assume the mind inside has gone soft, like fruit left too long on the counter. My son Derek and his wife Kayla certainly thought so. They saw me not as their father, but as a living, breathing bank account with a faulty memory, an obstacle to be managed on their path to the life they felt they so richly deserved. Their fatal mistake was forgetting what I did for 50 years. I was a plumber. I find leaks. It all started on a Tuesday in my kitchen. The room still smells of my late wife Martha's lemon cleaner, if you breathe in deep enough. Derek and Kayla arrived unannounced, their smiles as bright and fake as cubic zirconia. They brought a bakery box of donuts I knew they'd never touch. Kayla placed it on the counter with a flourish, her manicured nails tapping on the cardboard. They were here for more than a social call. The predatory gleam in their eyes was unmistakable. They made small talk for exactly 4 minutes. They asked about my health without waiting for an answer and complimented the roses in my garden they hadn't looked at. Then Derek, my only son, slid a thick manila folder across the oak table Martha and I had picked out half a century ago. The paper whispered over the wood grain, a sound like a snake slithering through dry leaves. The words on the top page were stark and unforgiving. Mortgage application. Kayla leaned forward, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "We found it, Paul. Our dream home. 4 bedrooms, a pool, and it's in a perfect school district for our future kids. It's an investment in our family's future, your legacy." She spoke of legacy as if it were a commodity to be bought and sold. Derek just nodded, his arms crossed, a silent enforcer. He knew what was coming next, and he was letting her do the dirty work, as usual. I opened the folder. The numbers swam before my eyes, but one stood out, circled in red ink. $400,000. I saw the space at the bottom, marked with a small X, waiting for a cosigner. My signature, my savings, my perfect credit, my home, all to be tethered to their reckless ambition. I looked from the paper to their expectant faces. They weren't asking. They were informing me of my new obligation. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my lukewarm coffee. I let the silence stretch out, watching the confidence drain from Kayla's face and a flicker of impatience cross Derek's. Finally, I closed the folder and slid it back across the table. "The answer is no," I said. My voice was quiet, but it filled the small kitchen. "I've worked my entire life to be secure, to have this house paid for. I will not risk it. Not for this." The change was instantaneous. The mask of familial affection dropped, revealing the raw, ugly entitlement beneath. Kayla's face hardened. "What do you mean, no? What else are you going to do with your money? It's just sitting there. We need this." Derek finally spoke, his voice rising. "We've been counting on you, Dad. We have plans. You can't just say no. It's selfish. You owe us this much after everything we do for you." Everything they do for me. The words hung in the air, thick with poison. They meant the weekly 30-minute visit where they stared at their phones, the occasional bag of groceries I never asked for, left on my porch like a donation. They saw their bare minimum effort as a monumental sacrifice that I was now duty-bound to repay by bankrupting myself for their swimming pool. I looked at my son and saw a stranger. I stood up, my old knees groaning in protest. "The conversation is over. Please see yourselves out." For a moment, Derek looked like he might explode. His face went purple with rage. You'll regret this, old man. He spat, grabbing the folder. You have no idea what you've just done. He and Kayla stormed out, slamming the door so hard, a picture of Martha on the mantelpiece rattled in its frame. The donuts remained on the counter, a sick, sweet monument to their greed. A week later, the certified letter arrived. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of. My hands, usually so steady from years of handling copper pipe, trembled as I opened it. They were suing me, not just for the house, but for emotional distress, for breaking a verbal promise they claimed I'd made. They were claiming I was mentally incompetent, and that my refusal was proof I couldn't manage my own affairs. They were trying to strip me of everything. I read the words, and something inside me didn't break. It hardened. The grief and shock calcified into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I walked over to the rattling picture of Martha, straightened it, and wiped a speck of dust from the glass. Okay, Martha, I whispered to her smiling face. They want a war. I guess we'll give them one. But we'll do it my way. Methodically, quietly. And we won't leave a single drop. Instead of flying into a rage, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was a plumbing problem. A massive, complicated, and filthy blockage in the system. And just like any other blockage, you don't fix it by banging on the pipes. You fix it by understanding the system, finding the weak points, and applying pressure in exactly the right place. I smiled. A genuine, cold smile. My first call wasn't to Derek. It was to Elizabeth Croft. She was the estate lawyer who helped me and Martha with our wills years ago. She was sharp, no nonsense, and had a memory like a steel trap. When I explained the situation, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she said just 2 words: the vultures. She'd seen this kind of predatory behavior from greedy children 100 times. Elizabeth's office was downtown, a sleek, modern space that was the exact opposite of my cozy home. She listened patiently as I laid out the whole story, her pen occasionally scratching a note on a yellow legal pad. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she looked me straight in the eye. Paul, they're betting on you being a typical elderly parent. They think you'll be too scared, too tired, or too proud to fight. They expect you to settle quickly to avoid a public spectacle. That's their first mistake, I said. I'm not tired, and I'm long past being scared of a little public spectacle. Elizabeth grinned. I was hoping you'd say that. Okay, Paul, here's what we do. We don't just defend. We go on the offensive. We countersue for legal fees and harassment, but to do that, we need proof. We need to build a case so airtight that it suffocates them. We need a timeline, evidence, everything. And that's when my old life's work became my new weapon. I went home and pulled out a fresh ledger book, the kind I used to use for tracking jobs and materials. At the top of the first page, I wrote, Project D&K. I began to document everything, every call, every text, every unannounced visit, the time, the date, the words spoken, the tone of voice. I was no longer a father dealing with his son. I was a master plumber, mapping out a faulty system. The calls started a few days later. At first it was Derek, his voice a mix of anger and feigned concern. Dad, just sign the papers. This lawsuit is expensive. We can make it all go away. He spoke as if he were doing me a favor, magnanimously offering to stop punching me if I just gave him what he wanted. I would listen, say very little, and then hang up and write it all down in my ledger. Each entry was a nail in his coffin. Then came the next phase of their attack, the public shaming. Taylor, a master of social media, took to the internet. She wrote a long, tearful post about her wonderful, hard-working husband and their cruel, senile father, who was hoarding his wealth and preventing them from starting a family. She painted me as a dragon sitting on a pile of gold, cackling as his children suffered outside the cave. She posted pictures of them looking sad in their small, expensive apartment, which she described as a hovel. She talked about my supposed memory lapses, twisting old, normal moments of forgetfulness into signs of advanced dementia. Friends and distant relatives, people I hadn't heard from in years, started calling. Some were concerned, but most were judging, their voices laced with pity and condescension. It stung. Of course it stung. To have your name, your mind, your very character assassinated by your own child for the world to see was a unique kind of pain. But every time the anger flared, I would look at Martha's picture. She would have told me to ignore the noise. She would have told me to focus on the pipes, on the mechanics of the problem. So I did. I printed every post, every comment, and filed it away in a growing binder labeled evidence. Elizabeth was thrilled. "Paul, this is a gift," she said, tapping the binder. "Their public statements are full of provable lies. This isn't just harassment, it's defamation. It establishes a pattern of malicious intent. Keep it coming. The more they post, the deeper the hole they dig for themselves. They think they're building public support, but what they're really building is our case against them." My plumber's brain started looking for other connections, other pipes in their financial house. For years, I'd helped them out. I'd paid a car repair bill here, covered their rent for a month there. I never kept close track, but I knew I had old bank statements. I spent a weekend in my dusty basement, surrounded by boxes of old paperwork, searching. I was looking for a leak, a slow drip they thought no one would ever notice, and then I found it. On a statement from 3 years ago, I saw a transfer from my account to theirs, earmarked for rent. But I also saw several payments they made that same month to a credit card company I didn't recognize. It was a high-interest, subprime lender. The kind you go to when you're desperate. I cross-referenced it with other statements. The pattern was clear. They were taking my help and servicing massive, hidden debt. I called Elizabeth immediately. "I think I found the main line," I told her. She had her firm's forensic accountant do a little digging. The number that came back was staggering. $47,000 in credit card debt alone, spread across 5 different cards. They weren't just bad with money. They were drowning in it. The $400,000 house wasn't a dream. It was a desperate, insane life raft they expected me to provide. "This changes everything," Elizabeth said, her voice buzzing with energy. "This is their motive. It's not about a family legacy. It's about a bailout. Their lawsuit isn't just frivolous, it's borderline fraudulent. They have fundamentally misrepresented their financial situation to you and to the court. We can prove they are not credible. We have them, Paul. We just need one more thing. One final, undeniable piece of evidence." That piece of evidence came to me, delivered by Kayla herself. She called me a few weeks before the initial court. I just stayed quiet, letting her talk. She filled the silence with a river of manipulative nonsense. She spoke of how stressful this was for Derek, how all they wanted was to make me proud. Then she delivered the payload, the one sentence that would bring their entire world crashing down around them. "I just want this to be over," she sighed dramatically. "Our lawyer said this is just a formality, Paul," she continued, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "He said that in his experience, most elderly people settle right away. They don't have the energy for a fight. He said it was the quickest way to get what we need. We can make this all go away if you just come to your senses." She thought she was being clever, applying one last bit of pressure. She had no idea she had just handed me the key to the entire city. I mumbled something non-committal and hung up. I played the recording back. Her words were crystal clear. It was a direct admission that the lawsuit was filed in bad faith, a predatory tactic based on a cynical assumption about my age and frailty. It was not the action of a grieving family trying to enforce a promise. It was the move of a predator trying to isolate and take down its prey. I saved the file and emailed it to Elizabeth with a simple subject line: "Checkmate." The days leading up to the hearing were quiet. Derek and Kayla, confident in their lawyer's strategy, ceased their calls and their online attacks. They believed they had me cornered, that I would show up to court a broken, confused old man, ready to sign anything to make the noise stop. They were living in a fantasy world they had constructed, one where they were the victims, and I was the villain. I spent that time in my garden. I pruned Martha's roses, pulled the weeds from the vegetable patch, and felt the warm sun on my back. There was a peace in the simple, honest work. My hands in the dirt, I felt more clear-headed than I had in years. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just ready. Ready to turn on the water and flush the whole rotten system clean, no matter what came out the other end. The morning of the hearing, I put on my best suit, the one I had worn to my retirement party. It felt a little loose, but it was a good suit. As I knotted my tie, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't see a senile, incompetent old fool. I saw a man who had built a life with his own two hands, a man who had loved a good woman and raised a son, a man who was about to defend his home and his honor. When I walked into the courtroom, I saw them sitting with their lawyer. They both wore expensive clothes, looking solemn and aggrieved. They glanced at me, a flicker of triumph in their eyes, before turning away to confer with their attorney. They looked like actors playing a part. They had no idea the play was about to be canceled and the theater set on fire. I sat next to Elizabeth, who gave my arm a reassuring squeeze. She had a stack of files in front of her, our binders of evidence, my ledger, the financial reports. Everything was in its right place, every pipe connected, every valve ready. Their lawyer started, his voice smooth and practiced, weaving a tale of a beloved father's descent into paranoia and a broken promise that had shattered his children's dreams. He called Kayla to the stand. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue, her voice trembling as she described my supposed confusion and anger. She spoke of my loneliness, twisting my love for Martha into a pathological attachment to the past. It was a masterful performance. I had to give her that. She was a magnificent liar. From the corner of my eye, I saw a few people in the gallery nodding in sympathy. Derek's testimony was shorter, more direct. He painted himself as the dutiful son, burdened by a father who was losing his grip on reality. He claimed I had promised them the money on numerous occasions, often in moments of what he called lucidity. He said filing the lawsuit was the hardest thing he'd ever done, a desperate act to save me from my own stubbornness. The lie was so audacious, it was almost breathtaking. Then it was Elizabeth's turn. She rose, her movements calm and deliberate. She approached the stand where Derek was still sitting. "Mr. Henderson," she began, her voice even, "you've testified that your father's refusal to co-sign this mortgage has caused you significant financial distress and derailed your life plans. Is that correct?" "Absolutely," Derek said, puffing out his chest. "We can't move forward without it." "Interesting. Because you and your wife have presented yourselves as financially prudent, correct? Just a young couple trying to build a future." "Yes, of course," Derek said, looking confused. Elizabeth placed the file on a witness stand. "Then can you please explain to the court this? Exhibit A. A summary of 5 separate credit card accounts in your names, with a combined outstanding balance of $47,281. The color drained from Derek's face. He looked at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. Kayla gasped audibly from her seat. Their lawyer jumped to his feet, objecting, but the judge waved him down, his eyes fixed on Derek. "Where did you get this?" Derek stammered. "It's a matter of public record if you know where to look," Elizabeth said coolly. "Is it not true that your father has given you money for rent, which you then use to service this massive, undisclosed debt?" Derek was silent. The entire courtroom was silent. The image of the responsible, suffering son was beginning to crack. The truth was leaking out. Elizabeth didn't wait for an answer. She moved on, turning her attention to Kayla. She produced a thick binder of social media posts. "Mrs. Henderson, is this your account? Did you write these posts describing your father-in-law as senile and cruel?" Kayla's voice was a thin whisper. "Yes. And did you write that he was, and I quote, hoarding his money while his family suffers in a hovel? All while you were carrying nearly $50,000 in high-interest consumer debt from luxury purchases and lavish vacations?" Kayla stared at her, speechless. Her carefully constructed victim narrative was being dismantled, piece by piece, right before her eyes. "Now, let's talk about this verbal promise," Elizabeth said, pacing slowly. You claim Paul repeatedly promised to give you this money. Yes, Kayla said, finding her voice again. Many times. He's just forgotten. It's part of his condition. She was doubling down on the lie, her only remaining move. And when he refused, you felt you had no choice but to sue him to enforce this promise? It was for his own good, she insisted, tears now genuinely welling in her eyes. Elizabeth stopped pacing and turned to face the judge. Your Honor, the plaintiff have based their entire case on two claims. One, that my client is mentally incompetent, a claim for which they have offered no medical evidence whatsoever. And two, that he broke a verbal promise. They claim this lawsuit is a painful last resort. But we have evidence that suggests a very different motive, a motive of pure predatory greed. Mrs. Henderson, Elizabeth said, turning back to Kayla, do you recall a phone call you made to Paul a few weeks ago? One where you attempted to persuade him to drop his defense? Kayla's eyes darted nervously to her husband. I make a lot of calls. I don't recall a specific one. You don't? Let me refresh your memory. You told him that your lawyer advised you this was a common tactic. That's not true, Kayla cried out. I never said that. I see, Elizabeth said, a grim finality in her voice. Your Honor, at this time the defense would like to play a recording of that phone call. The sound of their lawyer's chair scraping the floor was the loudest thing in the room. He was on his feet, sputtering objections. Illegal recording. Inadmissible. Elizabeth calmly replied, it was recorded in a single-party consent state, Your Honor. It is perfectly legal. The judge nodded slowly. Proceed. A speaker was brought out. And then, Kayla's voice, syrupy and false, filled the courtroom. It was followed by my own quiet responses. Then came the critical line, clear as a bell. Our lawyer said, this is just a formality, Paul. He said that in his experience, most elderly people settle right away. They don't have the energy for a fight. He said it was the quickest way to get what we need. It was over. I knew it in that instant. The confident smirk was wiped from their lawyer's face, replaced by a ghastly pale shock. Derek looked at Kayla with utter betrayal, as if seeing her and their shared ugliness for the very first time. Kayla just stared into the middle distance, her mask completely shattered, leaving only the raw, grasping greed for all to see. The dam hadn't just broken. It had been obliterated. That's when the meltdown began. It's his fault, Kayla shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. He made me do it. He was never going to give it to us. Derek started yelling at her. You idiot, you recorded that? Their lawyer was trying to silence them both, but it was too late. The well-rehearsed performance had collapsed into a chaotic, screeching mess of mutual recrimination. The judge slammed his gavel down. The sharp crack echoing through the room. Silence. His voice was like ice. He looked at Derek and Kayla with a level of contempt I had never seen on a person's face. He looked at their lawyer. Counsel, are you telling me you advised your clients to file a frivolous lawsuit based on the assumption that an elderly man would be an easy mark? The lawyer could only stammer, his career flashing before his eyes. The judge's ruling was swift and brutal. Case dismissed with prejudice. He ordered Derek and Kayla to pay for all of my legal fees, a sum I knew would be substantial. Then he turned his gaze back to my son and his wife. He informed them that he was referring the transcript of this hearing, particularly the recording and their sworn testimony, to the district attorney's office for review of possible charges of perjury and conspiracy to commit fraud. As we walked out of the courtroom, I didn't look back. I could hear Kayla sobbing hysterically. I felt no pity. I felt no anger. I just felt quiet. The pressure that had been building for months was finally released. Elizabeth walked beside me, her hand on my shoulder. You did it, Paul, she said. You flushed the system. I just nodded, feeling the sunshine on my face for what felt like the first time in a very long while. The aftermath was as devastating for them as the hearing itself. The story, complete with the details of the recording and the perjury referral, was picked up by the local news. The same community that had offered them sympathy online now turned on them with a vengeance. They became pariahs. Kayla lost her job. They were forced to sell their expensive car and break the lease on their apartment. My final act was a legal one. On Elizabeth's advice, we filed for, and were easily granted, a permanent restraining order. It was a sterile, impersonal document that severed the last, frayed thread connecting me to my son. There would be no tearful reconciliations, no deathbed apologies. He had made his choice at my kitchen table, and I had made mine in that courtroom. The pipes were cut clean. Life returned to a new kind of normal. The house felt lighter, quieter. It felt like mine again, not just the place I was inhabiting until they decided what to do with me. I spent my days in the garden, talking to Martha's roses. I reconnected with a few old friends from my plumbing union, men who understood the simple satisfaction of a job well done and the life honestly lived. One afternoon, a young couple from down the street knocked on my door. They had a baby in their arms and a leaky faucet in their kitchen. They had heard I used to be a plumber. I smiled, grabbed my old toolbox, and went with them. The feel of the wrench in my hand was familiar, comforting. I fixed their leak in under 10 minutes. They offered me money, but I refused. A plate of homemade cookies was more than enough. I realized that was what was missing. Not family in the biological sense, but connection, community. The simple give and take between people based on mutual respect, not on calculated entitlement. The young couple started stopping by more often, sometimes to ask for advice, sometimes just to share a cup of coffee. They saw me not as a bank account, but as a neighbor. As Paul, I never heard from Derek and Kayla directly again, though I saw their names in the paper one last time when they formally filed for bankruptcy. Their dream house, the legacy they demanded, had led them to utter ruin. They had grasped for so much, so greedily, that they ended up with less than nothing. They had lost their credit, their reputation, and any claim they ever had to the word family. Sometimes, in the evening, I sit on my porch and look at the picture of Martha on the mantelpiece. I think about what this all was for. It was never about the $400,000. I would have given them that and more if they had simply asked with respect, if they had shown themselves to be responsible, loving people. But they didn't want my help. They'd wanted my submission. They wanted to turn me into a utility. They forgot that even the oldest pipes have a breaking point. They thought I was a rusty, sputtering faucet, easy to ignore. They never bothered to check the pressure building up behind the wall. They saw an old man, and their greed blinded them to the plumber who still lived inside, the man who knew exactly how to find the leaks, shut off the flow, and protect his own foundation from those who would see it rot. The lawsuit was a blessing in disguise. It forced me to see the truth I've probably been avoiding for years. My son and his wife were not just misguided. They were rotten to the core. Their love was conditional, their respect non-existent. Cutting them out of my life wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of survival, like removing a cancerous growth. It was painful, but necessary for my own health and peace. My world is smaller now, but it is also richer. My days are filled with the simple pleasures of gardening, tinkering with small projects, and sharing stories with friends who value my company, not my net worth. The quiet of my house is no longer a sign of loneliness, but of tranquility. It is a home earned through a lifetime of hard work, and now, a home defended by the wisdom that work provided. I often think about that moment in the courtroom when the recording played. The look of pure shock on their faces wasn't just about being caught. It was the shock of a fundamental miscalculation. They had built their entire plan on the assumption of my weakness, my frailty, my decline. They couldn't comprehend that the old man they dismissed had been 10 steps ahead of them the entire time. Respect isn't something you can demand or inherit. It's not something you can sue for in a court of law. It's earned through honesty, integrity, and character. It's a lesson they never learned, and their failure to understand that simple truth cost them everything. They wanted my legacy, but they failed to see that a legacy isn't money or property. It's the name you leave behind and the honor with which you lived. My reputation in the neighborhood has ironically never been better. People I barely knew before stop me on the street to shake my hand. They don't see a victim. They see a man who stood his ground. They see someone who refused to be bullied, who fought for his dignity against his own family and won. It's a strange sort of celebrity, but it's one built on a truth they can all understand. I paid Elizabeth's final bill without a moment's hesitation. It was a lot of money, but it was the best investment I ever made. It wasn't a purchase of legal services, it was the price of my freedom. The freedom to live out my remaining years on my own terms. In my own home, beholden to no one's greed or expectations, but my own sense of what is right. The young family down the street invited me for dinner last week. As I sat at their table, watching them with their child, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. It was the simple, uncomplicated joy of a real family, a unit built on love and mutual support, not transactions. It was everything Derek and Kayla pretended to want, and everything they threw away. Justice, I've learned, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about restoration. It was about restoring the peace to my home. It was about restoring my good name. And most importantly, it was about restoring my belief in myself. They wanted me to believe I was finished, that my best years were behind me, and my only remaining purpose was to fund their future. I proved them wrong. My son chose a house over his father. He chose a swimming pool over a lifetime of memories. He thought he could just turn a valve and have my life savings flow into his account. He forgot that the man who installed all the valves in the first place knows exactly how to shut them off permanently. He forgot that a plumber always knows where all the bodies are buried, or in this case, where all the leaks are hidden. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across my garden, I feel a profound sense of peace. My life is my own. My home is my sanctuary, and my dignity is intact. I look over at Martha's smiling face in the picture frame, and I know she would be proud. I didn't just win a lawsuit. I took back my life. And for an old plumber, there's no sweeter victory than a system that finally runs clean.